Back to another week here of 2 hours no traffic, a Philadelphia New York sports podcast. I'm your host Philly Brandon, joined this week by my Philadelphia counterpart Tim Kelly of at Philies Nation, one of the premier Phillies Twitter accounts out there. Tim, thanks so much for taking the time to come join us.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, if you have been listening to the cast for a while, we had Tim way back before this became 2 hours no traffic, and it was a phenomenal Phillies interview. Those were some darker times. Now we have a little bit to look forward to, so I wanted to bring him back in for a more hopeful interview. And really, everything kind of turned around once the team decided to kind of cut bait, move on from Girardi, and they may have found their answer already on their bench. So, what are you hearing, or how do you feel about Rob Thompson this season, and then maybe going forward into next year?
Yeah, Rob has done a great job, and I can just say from being down there and media availabilities, he's been very nice guy, very friendly to work with. So, but beyond that, lots of guys are friendly and aren't good managers. He's done a good job, and really turned the season around. They went from 22-29 to still over 15 games above 500 now. So. He's done a great job. Obviously, it'll depend what happens in September, but certainly I would tend to think things are trending towards him being the full-time manager moving forward.
Yeah, I know he had been asked about it, and as far as I'm aware, there's a rule in the MLB. It's called the C League rule, where you have to do like an extensive coaching search. But it's hard to imagine anybody outperforming Rob, short of a horrendous September collapse. But besides the fact that the guys seem to like him better, and he is playing the young guys more often, what's the most tangible thing you've seen or felt from being around this team that Rob's been able to turn around since he's taken over?
It sounds like something you would say in like a tweet, but I really do think it's a vibes thing, and
Okay.
I think that just sometimes just having a different voice, a guy that's maybe a little bit less intense than Joe Girardi was, that allows you to flip the script on the season, and they've certainly done that. So, to me, sometimes the guy you're least expecting ends up being the perfect fit, and again, we'll see what happens in September. But based off of how he's performed in the first few months of the job, I just can't imagine him not being back as the manager next season.
Yeah, me either. And yeah, I think if this team secures a playoff berth, win or lose that round, I think he's earned a shot to get a full season at the helm. At least for me, I could kind of feel things changing from a vibes perspective, because I do definitely agree. I mean, Girardi's a decent X's and O's coach. He just never really seemed to have the guys. But I think it was Father's Day when they had the team photo with Rob in his classic suit with his fedora on, and then all the team kind of followed suit. That's when you started getting those good teams kind of vibes. Like the Eagles had that. The Sixers tend to have that when they have people in town. Like all these good teams that Philly has seen, they kind of got along. They related to each other. They were fun. The Phillies hadn't been fun until Rob took over, and I think that's made all the difference.
Yeah,
Um,
and I agree with what you're saying. Just from a perspective, this is my third year of covering the team, and the last 2 years, I'm happy to do it. I love the job. I don't take it for granted, but they were not fun teams. And some of that just had to do with COVID and how everything was
yeah.
in the world. But uh, I think you're right in the assessment that this season has had a different feel and just kind of generally been a more enjoyable product to watch.
Even Kruk would even go as far as to say, I mean, he's in the booth. He was like, "Oh, I used to hate coming to work, or I used to drag coming to work, and now you look forward coming to watch this team." And I think part of what gets people excited, gets the fans excited, is that the young guys on the Phillies are really bringing a lot of energy. When he gets his opportunities, guys like Nick Maton coming up huge and winning games for you in the late innings. Obviously, Veerling's been up and down, but we've needed a center fielder, and he's largely been able to step into that role. Um, and then Bryson Stott showing that he just might be a star in the making after having a shakier start to his MLB career. What have you seen from the young guys, maybe on a closer level than those of us watching on TV?
Yeah, I think you're right. Having young energy, you have a team with a ton of veterans, so having that energy of guys that are trying to make a name for themselves that haven't gotten big contracts yet. I think it's a good balance, and it is kind of something the Phillies have been missing the last few seasons. And beyond that, it's a sign that you're finally starting to develop some guys from within. And if you can add Andrew Painter, Mick Abel, Griff McGarry, some of the guys you're starting to hear about in the coming years, then maybe the farm system turns a corner and you become a really dangerous team, because the Phillies have shown they're going to spend. They've spent pretty much as anybody, or more than anybody except the Mets and the Dodgers over the last few years. So the money's going to be there. If you can supplement that with cost-controlled players, you're in a really good position.
Yeah, and I kind of like where they're at with that. Um, I'm a huge Gene Segura guy. I think people in this town are a little bit too anxious to get rid of him or to move on from him. As excited as I am about Maton and Stott, being that middle infield, Segura has kind of been our best defender since he's gotten over here, and one of the most consistent hitters on the team. Um, so it kind of puts you in a weird position where you have this guy that we're paying somewhat handsomely. I mean, he's one of the upper echelon players in this league, and you would like to cut some costs and move over to Maton second. But I'm just not sure if next season is the time to do that. Where do you kind of weigh on the whole youth movement versus established vets thing?
Well, I think Maton is more of a bench guy, most likely. So Bryson Stott has shown he can play second and short. There's a great shortstop class this offseason with Trey Turner, Dansby Swanson, Xander Bogaerts, and I'm blanking on the fourth person, but Carlos Correa potentially if he opts out. So if you go in there, then yes, you move forward without Gene Segura. Gene Segura's got a $17 million option for next year. My guess would be that's declined for sure. It's just a matter of whether they bring him back on a lesser deal than that. And they may do that, and that may work. I do get a little bit concerned with infielders, middle infielders that are approaching their mid-30s. He's had some lower body injuries, specifically last year. So I wonder at this stage of his career, can you count on him to play 140 games or whatever you need out of him? But certainly when he's in there, the arm is unmatched. It's significantly better than any second baseman in the league, and he's a very good hitter. And the fact that you have him now hitting seventh and eighth in the lineup Sundays, it gives you an idea of how deep the Phillies lineup has the potential to be.
Yeah, he's the scary 8 hitter that I'm sure you remember. What was it, 2 or 3 seasons ago? For whatever the reason, Franco started the season hot and he was hitting eighth, and we have the best 8 hitter in the league, and we all know how that story ended up playing out. But Segura could really be that kind of guy for real.
Yeah, he could be. And now I don't know that necessarily he'll be hitting that low every game, but he did it over the weekend. And I asked Rob Thompson about it, and he just basically laughed and said, like, it's a good position to be in. Gene Segura is willing to do whatever will help the team. And when you have a lineup that deep, you're going to win games.
Yeah, for sure. It's 8 deep where you feel really good about it. And that's a great space to be in. At this point, I'm just kind of nitpicking and being overly hopeful. Where things start to get a little bit dicier is the 9 hole seems to be kind of a carousel between Verlin getting some time, Marsh, who obviously we just brought in, getting more time. But that's kind of your question mark right now is what you're going to get out of that middle outfield position. What's kind of your stance on which guy you feel better about as the games start to mean more?
I would probably base it on matchups. If you're facing a right-handed pitcher, I'd start Marsh. If you're facing a left-handed pitcher, in many cases, I would start Vierling. But he has been very cold these last couple months. So I kind of think Vierling is more someone that's a bench piece that maybe plays 2 games a week as opposed to being a consistent player. But again, if this is your number 9 hitter, I don't know how drastic of an offensive performance you need out of them if they're fielding well. Marsh is a very good center fielder. Vierling is adequate and can play all 3 outfield positions, and some infield positions. So he has value in that sense. So you're in a pretty good position in center field. There's so few needle movers in that position. So if you don't end up with Mike Trout or one of the superstar center fielders, having a guy that can field well and hit ninth in your lineup, there's worse situations to be in.
For sure. And at least just from what I've seen since he's come over, I feel better about Brandon March's production today than I did when we first brought him in, because he was supposed to be a real project hitting wise. And you can see he's more comfortable at the plate. There's a little bit more pop when he does connect. So if that's all we get out of 9, I'm happy about it. There's just not many question marks in this lineup, and that's really one of the few that remains. When we started the season, there was a big question mark at third as to which Alec Bohm were we going to get going forward. And out of the gates, it didn't really look pretty. It looked like the Alec Bohm that spent some time in the minors last year and couldn't quite get it together. And he has turned around in a massive way. You were a little bit closer than a lot of us. What did that process look like when things were as low as they can get to then, the month of July being one of the hottest hitters in the MLB? Can you kind of take us through how we got from there to here?
Well, I think the Phillies PR staff did a genius job at managing that whole situation with him getting caught on camera saying, I effing hate this place, which honestly to me was completely reasonable given the circumstances. He was mad at work and getting booed. Completely normal reaction. He handled it well after the game. And I think that did give him kind of a jolt to see how the next night he got the standing ovation. Look, I don't think Alec Bohm is a major league third baseman. I think more likely he belongs at first base or DH. But the job that Bobby Dickerson has done improving the play at third base and at the very least making sure when he gets in front of the ball that he's throwing to first because he has a strong arm. I think a lot of it earlier in the season was not quite the yips, but it was definitely mental and throwing to first base. He's in a good position from that sense, and he may be at third base moving forward given the construction of your roster. But he's someone to me, I've always said, like if he becomes a guy that hits 25 to 30 home runs a season and the power is absolutely in there, you see it in flashes almost every time he hits a home run, it's like 400 feet. If you get that consistently out of him, I think he's an all-star caliber hitter, and you figure out whatever in the field. It worries me a little bit that how much he wears his emotions on his sleeve. It's good to care, but in a 162-game season, you're going to have ups and downs, and I think sometimes maybe he gets a little too low. But if he's able to control that, I think he's going to have a long career because if you can hit, they'll find a place for you to play.
Exactly. And you mentioned on his home run balls, and when he does get a hold of one, he absolutely gets a hold of one. But you can even see it, if his power numbers don't match up to how well he's seeing and hitting the ball right now, even when he'll hit a gap single in the outfield. If you look at his exit velocity, they're always screaming off the bat. I think for him, it might be more launch angle than anything, which is something you can absolutely work on in the offseason. Don't tweak anything you're doing right now because he's been red hot. But all the pieces are there. I think you're right. He's a tweak or two away. And whether he winds up at first base or not, that's going to be a big question in the offseason. We'll get to Reese / Nola later on. That's really what that decision comes down to, unfortunately. Do you value, your young first baseman you've kind of developed, or the guy you thought was going to be your ace who may or may not still be? But that's a whole separate topic. We brought in a lot of new guys in the offseason, and they've had their own roller coaster. Kyle Schwarber obviously was, scorching hot through June, July, 35 home runs. The power numbers are there. He was never going to hit for average. Then you had Nick Castellanos on the other side, who was ice cold, has recently gotten it going, but a lot of Phillies fans feel like it's he's cheaply gotten it going. If you kind of get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know that it's cheaply, but you didn't sign Nick Castellanos to hit bloop singles.
Exactly.
I think there's something impressive about the fact that you're such a good hitter that even when you're really lost at the plate at times, you run into some singles because you're a smart hitter and you know how to put the ball in the bat the right way. But this is a guy that since 2014, I think the only person in baseball with more doubles than him is Freddie Freeman. So he'll hit some home runs. He'll hit the 34 last year, but he's someone that is hitting doubles into the gap when he's going right. And I think you saw that in April, and you've seen a couple flashes of it since. He's still among the league leaders in doubles, I believe, but you haven't seen it on as consistent of a basis. I know he moved out of Great American Ballpark, which is probably the most hitter-friendly park in baseball, but he was a really good hitter when he was in Detroit, which is not a hitter-friendly park, and Wrigley Field, which it just kind of depends what day it is if that's a good hitter's park. So I think he's going to, over the lifetime of this contract, figure it out offensively. He should be a DH every day. The defensive metrics bear that out. Your eyes bear it
Yeah,
out.
it's not there.
And I think that's partially why he's dealing with some of this turf toe right now. Is the workload in the outfield? You expected almost nothing, and you ended up with him playing in right field pretty much every game this season. Now, depending on what happens with Bryce Harper, you might see him in the outfield to begin next season as well. But over the long term in this contract, I think he's going to hit significantly better, especially in terms of extra base hits than you've seen this season. And over the last month or so, he's taken the season from being like a complete train wreck to being underwhelming, but he's still finding a way to be productive. And over the course of a 5-year deal, ideally you get off to a great start like Raul Ibanez did
Mm-hmm.
on his 3-year deal, where you're scorching hot the first half of the season and you become a fan favorite. But there's going to be ups and downs over that, and sometimes it happens at inconvenient times. But I still buy into Nick Castellanos, the hitter.
Oh yeah, I'm in no way suggesting it was a poor signing or a poor gamble. I mean, even if he absolutely does tank for the entire 5-year deal, you take that gamble every single time when a guy like him comes around.
Yeah, I will say I always thought Starling Marte was the better fit, and he could have played in center field. So that would have been the signing I made rather than Castellanos, and he's having an excellent season with the Mets. But obviously there were risks with him too. He's 33 years old, and he hasn't played center for the Mets as much because they have Brandon Nimmo. But even if he was able to play center for you for a year or two, likely the long term of that deal, he's playing in a corner outfield position. So I think he fit the 2022 Phillies probably better than Castellanos did, but I understand why they went in the direction that they did.
Yeah, you could see what the theme was in the offseason. It was, I mean, we've had a team that struggled to produce runs for God as long as I can remember. So I mean, you just kind of swing as far as you can in the other direction, which is how you wind up with the corner outfield that we have. I mean, you have in an ideal world, neither Castellanos nor Schwarber would be everyday outfielders, and we're living in a reality where both of them are the case. Next season, assuming that the team shakes up a little bit, we're potentially going to have at minimum 2 guys who could be a DH. And people can make the argument that Reese would be just as acceptable there. Same with Bohm. So I mean, we're a team with a lot of bats and not a lot of fielders. So I mean, what kind of moves do you see the Phillies making to start to balance it out a little bit more?
Well, I think we'll see how the rest of this season ultimately plays out. Not to cop out on that, but
Yeah,
uh, I would be very careful in moving on from Reese Hoskins, because he is going to be a guy that gets on base a lot and hits 30 home runs. But he isn't a great fielder. Although he's actually been a better fielder this year in general than he has in the past, but there's been a few notable hiccups. Uh, he's someone that I don't know that you can re-sign him to a long-term deal, because you have so many guys on this team signed through their mid 30s now, or early 30s at the very least, that are DH or DH adjacent. And I just don't know that you can add another one, because there's only one DH spot. You don't want to have someone entrenched at that spot, as you've seen this year, because uh, stuff happens over the course of an
yeah,
162 game season where guys you didn't expect to need to DH end up DHing. And, maybe if you move Hoskins, maybe that allows Bohm to slide to first. You would have to weigh that with, is the defensive getting Bohm away from third, is the defensive upgrade so drastic that it's worth losing Hoskins' offensive production? The other possibility is maybe you say, all right, Kyle Schwarber is going to go to first base, which he played a tiny bit with the Red Sox last year, and you get him out of left field and you find a way to improve defensively there. And it's probably more realistic that you can find offensive production like Reese Hoskins. It's not going to be the same as Reese Hoskins, but you find like a Mark Canha, like the Mets found, or someone to play left field next year, and you improve defensively in left field, and Schwarber no longer is out there. You end up with him at first base. So there are a lot of scenarios to go through. It's also possible they run it back with this team next year and Hoskins plays in his contract year and you see what happens next year. But it's definitely something to consider. And you also have the considerations in the middle infield of just Bryson Stott open next season as your starting shortstop or second baseman. It's going to be one of the two, but it depends. If Gene Segura is back, Stott's your shortstop. If Gene Segura is not back, then I would tend to think you go after one of the bigger shortstops and Bryson Stott plays second base. So Dave Dombrowski has many options he can move forward with this offseason, and it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, the whole infield could really shift around. But there's one name that kind of comes up is what are we going to do with this guy? Because everybody, you start to get a feel where people are going to be like, Maton's going to be a bench guy next year. Stott's going to be a middle infielder. They brought Derek Hall up to get him some major league experience, and he kind of filled the gap. And we were missing that pop in the middle of the lineup. So now we know what we have. He knows what he can do in the major league level. It's going to be hard to keep him down in the minors for too much longer. So where does he fit into that equation, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think he's a candidate to play outfield. Rob Thompson basically said, like, he's someone in a pinch you could do it, but I don't get the sense that's like a serious consideration moving forward. So, yeah, I mean, it depends what happens with Reese. But, I mean, if you're moving Kyle Schwarber to first base, then obviously you're not going to platoon Derek Hall. You're not going to platoon anybody, but you're definitely not going to platoon a left-handed hitter because Derek Hall really is a guy that plays against righties and not against lefties. So I don't know that you can't basically do what you did this season where when you have a need for him, he's at the majors, and when you don't, you have him at AAA. Maybe a team will call and be interested trade-wise, but my guess would be that the return would be minimal and you're probably better off keeping him. It's probably disappointing for him that he's back at AAA right now, but injuries are going to happen. Like you look around, Harper's been hurt this year. Reese Hoskins been healthy this year, but ended the last 2 seasons injured. Like you can go down the list, and one way or another, an opportunity. Maybe you move Schwarber to first base next year, but whoever you have in left field gets hurt, and the best thing for your team is to have Schwarber play left field and Hall come up and play first base. So it's kind of one of those things. It's better to have that excess, which a year or two ago when Dave Dombrowski took over, one of the big problems is they just had no one to tap into in the minor leagues. This year you've had some veterans. Derek Hall's a rookie, but you've had other guys like Jairo Munoz come up. So I think Johan Camargo has been another example of a guy that's kind of going back and forth. It's good to have that surplus of guys that where you have 31 guys you're comfortable playing at the majors as opposed to 23.
Which is, it's kind of a little bit ironic that it's gone that way because the biggest knock on Dave Dombrowski is like he leaves places, their farm system's kind of in ruin. And while, the development of these guys in the farm system already is not necessarily on Dombrowski, it's just fun to watch that our road team or taxi squad, whatever you want to call it, has improved since he's gotten here. And we've leaned on him in, a lot of occasions, especially recently with some spot starts, given that Wheeler's out and then losing Eflin for a significant amount of time. What's your confidence level like with the starting pitching rotation that we're trotting out there at the moment?
Well, I would say if you need Christopher Sanchez or Bailey Falter to pitch the 5th day in the rotation, you're probably fine. If you need them to pitch in a win or go home game, yeah, I wouldn't feel very good about that. But you have the potential to get seemingly you are getting back Zach Wheeler. Zach Eflin might be back in a bullpen role, but not in the starting rotation the rest of the year. So in some senses, it comes down to what happens in front. Can Zach Wheeler stay healthy? How does Aaron Nola pitch in September? How does Kyle Gibson continue to pitch well? What do you get out of Noah Syndergaard? Because if you're winning 3 out of the 4 games and then it's the 5th turn in the rotation and you need either Falter or Sanchez to pitch, okay. If it's the 5th turn in the rotation, you've lost 3 out of 4, and then you have to rely on one of those guys to be a stopper. I don't think that's what they are. But for being like the 6th or 7th guy, I think you're in decent position. And given that Syndergaard and Kyle Gibson are both free agents at the end of the season, I don't think it's a bad place to be in with one of those two guys, because it wouldn't surprise me if one of them opens the season next year in the rotation while you're kind of biding your time, waiting on Andrew Painter or potentially Griff McGarry to come up and join the rotation.
I know Andrew Painter's been, extremely exciting, and there was some rumor that they could compete for a spot next year in camp. I think that's a little bit soon, considering they just recently made the jump to Double A. But if they continue to dominate the Double A level the way they did in High A, I could see where you could make that argument.
Yeah, well, Dombrowski basically said they're coming to spring training next year. He more or less said that before the trade deadline. So you'll see where you're at there. I don't think McAble is necessarily a candidate, but who knows with Andrew Painter? I mean, Dave Dombrowski has brought up young guys that are 20 years old, which Andrew Painter will be next season. You don't want to compare anyone to Josh Beckett or Justin Verlander. Justin Verlander is going to the Hall of Fame. Josh Beckett won multiple championships, but there are guys that have come up in organizations Dave Dombrowski has been in charge of that have had a lot of success from a young age. So honestly, it would surprise me if Andrew Painter isn't in the rotation at some point next season.
Okay, I mean, it'd be exciting for for Phillies fans, because he's got to be one of the most followed prospects as far as watching game film and like all of his highlights showing up on Twitter. But with the 3.5 minutes or so I have left, what are we getting out of Aaron Nola down the stretch this season? Because I know fans like myself are starting to get a little uneasy that I've seen this movie before, and I'm getting a little worried.
Yeah, he's going to have to exercise some demons. Obviously, the last start in Arizona was a disaster. Start before that, he threw a complete game. 2 starts before that, or 3 starts, I guess, before that, he went toe-to-toe with Jacob deGrom at Citi Field. So he's going to have to exercise some demons in September. He has not been good in some of those games in the final month of the season, and the Phillies need him to be. He needs to be for his future and for the fact that this year, September might not be it. If he struggles in September, the Phillies may still be in the playoffs, and you kind of have to figure out how you proceed with the rotation in the postseason. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Aaron Nola. He has had a great season to this point. He's been their best pitcher. He's rebounded from a disappointing 2021 season by his standards, but unquestionably he has to kind of shake that and prove that come this final month of the season he's able to pitch well, and we'll see what happens.
Well, you heard it from the guy, just about as close to the source as you can get. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the pod and talking about Philly stuff. I never get to do a whole episode about baseball, so I always love when you're around to come on. If you want to follow, the best in-depth analysis of Phillies games, post-game coverage, etc., check Tim out. He's the editorial director at Philies Nation, and you can also check him out on his personal Twitter at Tim Kelly Sports, both of which are phenomenal resources during the Phillies season and during Phillies games. But Tim, thanks again so much for coming on. This was a great time.
Awesome. Thanks, man.